Welcome to Sentences with the Simpsons. Now, if you don't know the Simpsons, you will know them after this. This is Mom. Her name is Marge. She is an independent woman. She needs no one. So we're going to make her an independent clause. She is a simple sentence. She needs nothing else to stand alone. She's independent and she can survive all on her own without the help of anyone else. So Marge is an independent clause. Just like Marge is an independent clause can survive on its own. It's a complete sentence. It has a subject and it has a verb, which expresses a complete thought. It stands by itself. Aha. But then, these are examples of Marge. Bart does not like to go to school. Bart doesn't like. Subject, verb. Lisa loves the saxophone. Subject, verb. Homer does not work hard at the power plant. Subject, verb. It stands alone. It's independent. Remember, independent clauses are also called simple sentences. Now, we're going to make Marge really important because we are going to make a compound sentence. Now, if you know what a compound word is, a compound word, remember, is taking two words and putting them together to make one. Ballpark, homework, put together, one word. That's the same thing. It's taking two simple sentences and putting them together. But to put them together, we need to make a bridge between the two sentences. And so what we do is we put a comma and then something called a fanboy. You're familiar with fanboys, I'm sure. Fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. So we take one simple sentence, one independent clause, one Marge, put in a comma, put in a fanboy, and then another Marge, and that gives us a compound sentence. Bart hates school. See, Bart hates school stands all by itself. But we want to add something to it, so we put the comma, and we put the so from the fanboys, right? He makes fun of the teachers. This stands alone, this stands alone. To bridge them together, we put the comma and the fanboy, okay? Then we have someone that is very dependent. His name is Homer. Yes, he's the dad. Yes, he's the husband. But he can't do anything on his own right. He always needs Marge. Homer is a dependent clause. Homer messes everything up. When he's on his own, he can't function without Marge by his side. He is dependent on Marge. He cannot survive without her. And so this is where we get dependent clause. Dependent Homer clause. Just like Homer, a dependent clause is not a complete sentence. It's not a complete thought. It can't survive by itself. And it doesn't express that complete thought. It is not a sentence, despite you trying to write them down and claiming they are, because we've seen your writing. Homer, the slide, hold on, yes. The odd W's. Now, I can't do it like Homer does, but whatever. The odd W words. Dependent clause Homer. If a dependent clause begins with a signal word that begins with one of those letters, okay, we call them the odd W's words because they signal a beginning of a Homer, a beginning of a dependent clause. They're also known as subordinating conjunctions. You might want to learn that for later on. So, here are the common dependent clauses. The okay? After, although, as, when, while, until, because, before, if, and since. If you have any sentence that starts with these words, or if you have any clause that starts with these words, you know automatically that is going to be a dependent clause. It's going to need something else to make it a complete sentence. So, a rule to know. A dependent clause, Homer, must have an independent clause, a Marge, by it to be a complete sentence, what I just said. So let's review the three types of sentences. We have a simple sentence, an independent clause. That's a Marge, stands by itself, doesn't need anything else. Then we have a compound sentence. Those are two Marges we're going to put together. So to bridge them together, we're going to put the comma and then a fanboy. And then we have the complex sentence. And it's because we're ending up putting the husband in the mix, so it's complex. Homer, right? Homer, a dependent clause, comma, plus a Marge. Now, so this would be if Homer starts out, if it starts out with a dependent clause and goes to a Marge, but you can also have a Marge that goes to a Homer. And this is what we're going to talk about now because it might get a little confusing. So, here are your simple sentences. A subject plus a verb. Marge walks to the lake. Homer sleeps too much. You see the verb is in pink and the underline is a subject. Bart is cool. Lisa will want to get a dog. And the last normal person on earth is Ned. Well, that's debatable. Okay. All right. So this is the complex sentences. And just like the word says, it can be a little confusing. I will honestly tell you this is where you make the most of your mistakes when you're talking about your punctuation and commas in particular. Okay, so a complex sentence is Homer, remember, he's dependent, comma, plus Marge, okay? Okay, until Homer met, that's a dependent clause. Is that a sentence? Until Homer met, well, it's starting out with an IW, so it's got to be a dependent clause. But a dependent clause, you also realize it feels like there's something that's just hanging out there. It needs more. It can't stand by itself. So until Homer met Marge, comma, he was a nobody. So, until Homer met Marge, then what do? We add the comma. He was a nobody. We don't add a fanboy, because I didn't go there. We add just the comma between a dependent clause and an independent clause. If you put them together, it's just a simple comma. Now, if we do it the opposite way, we put a Marge first, plus a Homer second. This is what it looks like. Homer was a nobody until he met Marge. Homer was a nobody. That could have ended it right there. That's a Marge, right? Period. But because we have an IW, we're going to add some more information until he met Marge. In a complex sentence means you have an independent clause and a dependent clause. You have a Marge and you have a Homer. In whichever way you put them, first or second. If Marge starts out first, she's dominant, you don't need anything else, you just add Homer and fine without a comma. But if Homer tries to start doing it all by himself and realizes he needs Marge, we need to put a comma in there to add Marge. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's make some complex sentences. Here are the formulas. A dependent clause. What's his name again? Homer. He's a dependent clause. He cannot stand by himself. He is never, ever, ever a complete sentence. Put him together with Miss Marge. If Marge will come up, she's that independent clause. It equals a complex sentence. Now, here's some examples of complex sentences plus the odd W's plus Homer plus Marge. So that means that all of these sentences are going to start out with a dependent clause, and they need to add Marge to make it whole, right? And you'll see they all begin with an IW, right? Until Lisa goes to college. Is that a complete sentence? No. Until she goes to college, what happens next? Well, we have to put a comma because we're going to add Marge. Comma, she will have to live with her parents. Perfect. She will have to live with her parents could be a sentence all by itself. That's why it's a Marge. Put them together, put the comma. When the grass turns green, what happens? Well, let's add Marge. Comma, Homer will have to mow the lawn. After Bart passes 3rd grade, what happens? We need a Marge, comma. There will be a huge celebration. Okay. That was one way. Here's the other way a complex sentence is. We're going to put Marge first. An independent clause. Maybe. Maybe not. An independent clause plus a dependent clause, Homer. He looks so forlorn. So, an example of a complex sentence where Marge starts off. We're going to start out with an independent, right? Plus Homer. You never put a comma because Marge is so dominant. If she starts off, you don't need anything else, right? So, Lisa will have to live with her parents until she goes to college. There's the IW. So we know that this right here is the dependent clause, okay? But because we're tacking it on to Marge, we don't need a comma there. Homer will have to mow the lawn when the grass turns green. There will be a huge celebration when Bart passes 3rd grade. Okay, so you've seen both ways on the complex sentence. So let's practice different kinds of sentences. So, Wakeland High School is ranked number 1 in Frisco ISD. What kind of sentence is this? Is it simple? Is it compound or complex? And how can you tell? Wakeland High School is ranked number 1 in Frisco ISD. That is a simple sentence. We know it starts out, Wakeland High School is ranked number 1. We don't need in Frisco. It could be just ranked number 1. But because it doesn't have a comma there, it's a standalone. It's a Marge. It's fine. It's a simple sentence. Boom. Miss Lawrence is quite a strange teacher. Hush. But Miss Gates is even stranger. Yes. What kind of sentence is this? Is it simple? Is it compound or complex? And how can you tell? Miss Lawrence is quite a strange teacher is a Marge. It stands by itself. But Homer has to come in with his big butt, excuse the language, B-U-T, okay, his I-W butt. So we put a comma and a but. Miss Gates is even stranger, okay? Now look at that. That is a fanboy. But right there turns into a fanboy because Miss Gates is even stranger can stand alone. So that's where you get tricky, right? Tricky. Although I cannot swim, the beach is a glorious vacation spot. What kind of sentence is this? Simple, compound, or complex, and how can you tell? What does the sentence start with? Although is a what? It's a, right? It's one of those words. So it is definitely a Homer. So if it's a Homer and then it has a comma, the beach is a glorious vacation spot. It's a sentence on its own, a simple sentence added to a dependent clause makes it what?